Thank you very much for joining us on the Modern Job Search Checklist. Welcome back to our little gathering every Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Central. I just want to be sure that you are in tune with some of the most interesting um, preferences that we have in giving out career advice. Of course, it's always our perspective, but we try to follow the best practices as much as we possibly can. With me today and always every Friday is Damian Birkel. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Good deal. And today, our guest is Paula Christensen. If you've watched the Wednesday show at some particular point on Job Seeker Nation, Paula was a guest there, and I brought her on this show to join us here. How are you, Paula?
I'm doing good.
Doing good. All
Happy
right.
that it's Friday.
I know. I
Yeah,
know.
true.
Yes, so am I. Well, the days get blurred for me, but sometimes I can't tell one from the other. But there are times like that. We have a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of things going on, but I'd be remiss if I did not mention about the better.com debacle layoffs that I think everybody's kind of talking about. And because this has been a snowball that's just getting larger and larger as each day. It started out with the Zoom call, 900 employees being told that they were the unlucky ones on the call who are getting laid off. Unfortunately, there are some issues with that. Like one, they were ambushed. Let's just call it that. I think that's a fair word to use because they had
Mhm.
no idea. Then the CEO apologized, and one of the questions I know I had running up into that particular point said, "Oh, he must not have an HR." Well, apparently he did have an HR.
Can you
and,
imagine that HR person
yeah,
behind the scenes?
can you imagine
No.
going, "Where were you guys? What were you
Right.
doing?" And then there were PR and marketing people, their C-suite people resigned
Right.
and that was a kind of good sign saying, okay, we know we're a part of it. We may not have pulled the trigger, but we put the gun in his hand. So I think that was something that happened. Now all these chain events have happened to the point to where not only the national media, international media, I mean, seriously, international media, all the way from Edinburgh to Australia is covering this piece of news. But
Absolutely.
also that Business Insider had just reported that there are lawyers getting together for a big class action suit because one of the compliances he failed to do was giving people 60-day notices throughout that. So I want to give you guys a chance to comment that because I think we would be silly in talking about job advice and giving people job advice if we didn't somewhat touch on it just a little bit to begin with. So, Damien, I'm going to start with you, and then Paula, if you want to comment, you can feel free to have at it. Damien and I can probably talk about it all day, uh, but go ahead, Damien.
Uh, Disclaimer, the opinions you're about to hear are from someone who got fired by email after being with the college for 10 years.
Oh.
Uh, and my boss called me on Friday at 3 o'clock and said, "Have you read the email I sent to your home address and to your college address?" And I said, "No, I read emails on Sunday because I can't do anything until Monday." He said, "Read that email from me now and have a great weekend."
Mm,
I'm
yeah,
so
Uh,
sorry.
yeah, tone
and,
deaf.
and my yeah, absolutely. And the best, and you'll be working for the next 7 weeks until your contract is done. Um, so,
But that's notice. That's notice.
oh no, no,
At
no.
least you got 7 weeks notice. I mean, yeah. I mean, at least you got some notice. It could have waited till Monday, but 7 weeks is more than 60 days. Oh,
Oh no,
almost 60
no.
days. It's not quite 60, but go ahead.
And yes, it was noticed. What the angle that I was coming at was the feelings of being ambushed,
Mm-hmm.
uh, having been on the phone with him,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of just telling him over the
Right.
phone,
Yeah.
right? read your email. And so where I'm going is I really feel for the 900 people that thought they were there for a regular Zoom meeting
Yeah.
to be treated so tersely, and to just being, basically it said, if you are in this meeting, you're unlucky and you've just lost your jobs, and then just end the meeting. And to me, it is the callousness, the tone deafness, and the arrogance of a move like that without even thinking about the feelings of the people whose lives you've just crushed just in time for Christmas, not even thinking about the well justified backlash and the long term impact that this is going to have on their company for years and years and years. And if you were to say to me, give it to me in 3 words, it would be, how dare he?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paula.
I think for me, where my mind went to almost immediately is the bigger picture of all those companies, big companies especially, who have remote workers,
Hmm.
who we don't know what's around the corner with the economy and how are they going to navigate this. I can think of, you know, as a former HR person, I can think of many ways that they could have done it differently, but it is such a wild, wild west out there right now. It's kind of like unprecedented. How should they do this? What do you guys think? Like, what, obviously just so callous, like you mentioned, Damien, what could have they done? Do you think they should have went through managers so that it was a one-on-one meeting with, I don't know how many managers all at the same time in order to disseminate
Let me
information quickly?
let me give a disclaimer here. Damien had the unfortunate being on the other side and firing 5,000 employees.
Wow.
So you're talking to somebody who
He's an
really
expert. Right.
that would be an expert in this particular area and how to facilitate 5,000. When you talk about 5,000 versus 900,
Right.
um, you know, yeah, it could be done and it should be done within a certain time period, not, oh, let's just go ahead and rip the bandage off at one time. This was obviously he doesn't have any patience either. But go ahead, Damien. Please answer that question.
Uh, I ended up subbing for my boss who broke her leg, and managed the process for this major corporation uh, worldwide that had thousands of employees. And the training for this event had been going on for months. Script, rank, where you were, what you
Interesting. Yeah.
qualified, et cetera, et cetera. And so, the good news is when the day came, everybody knew their spot. The
Yeah.
bad news is they had already gotten used to in their mind, that Larry, Mary, and Joe were no longer going to be with the company, and kind of backed away from them, knowing that this was coming. However, at 9 o'clock sharp, it all started. And in every building, every manager, every director was bringing people in and bringing people out. But there was a career counselor standing by to take that person after their professional life ends, and helped pick them up and walk them through what was next.
Right.
And although so many people lost their job, and it was a very difficult day for both sides of the desk,
Right.
it was at least humane.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and a situation like that is never easy. And what they also had done before this is they had a juiced up benefit package for people who had worked for the company for X amount of years, and could do like an early retirement.
Mhm.
And those who chose it, to a person, said it was the best decision I ever made. except for the guy on Friday who had accepted everything, was delighted, and at 4:55 decided it was the wrong thing for him. He rescinded his rich package, came in on Monday, and what do you think happened?
He was fired.
Yes, he was outplaced.
Mhm.
And who
Or
do you
not.
think the lucky guy was that got to tell him?
Yeah.
But anyways, my point is there's a good way to do something like this, and
Right.
there is a bad way to do something like this. And what happened with the 900 people is the worst that I have heard of in 30 years because it was so terse, impersonal, callous, uncaring. And then for him to turn around and bash his own employees on various social media, I mean, good Lord.
Right. Right. And
Right.
do you think it adds another element that it was remote, that the remote workforce?
Yeah, the original somebody took the film was original off of their computer as this guy was talking. That's how it kind of went
Mhm.
the wrong direction. Right there, that should tell you that that even though if you're a leader in that in if you're in the C-suite, even though like I said, you didn't pull the trigger, you put the gun in his hand. You knew that it was even the wrong guy to carry the gun.
Right.
That's where it gets because previous before that he had told people they were dumb dolphins, and he said this in. I mean, first of all, that image of a dumb dolphin, I would probably pick sloth if you really wanted to go all the way,
Right, right.
And
but dolphins, really?
right.
Okay,
And just the
so
wording, right?
right, but I think
So
too. I
cruel.
think too here there's a lesson for job seekers in this. And I think that this is a good time to kind of take this out because this is direction I tried to go in on some of the conversations I've had. One
Mhm.
is that when you get bad news like that, you definitely want to you have to take it in, but somehow overcome uh, overcome the emotional aspect of it because you're going to actually feel the horror of especially when something like that happens. At least if you've gotten some notice and you have some time to sort out the details, then you can go back and ask questions. And poor HR in this instance, and this is where I kind of feel for them. Now you're going to have 900 phone calls asking you,
Right.
okay, what are you going to say when the next employer call? You're going to say that I was terminated, which was some of the original language that was used, which I thought was like, is this a termination or a layoff? Because that's going to be one of the questions. And what's the difference? And I understand some companies use the word termination, whether there's a layoff or being fired,
Right.
but you, as a job seeker, now you'll have to get clarification too. Is that what are you going to say? What is the actual and get it in writing? Secondly, of course, you want to go through your benefit package. You want to find out if there's going to be outplacement. If there's some other mitigating issues that you're going to need to know, because not everybody's benefit package is going to be the same because some people have negotiated that. But also you want to take in consideration of how the company's going to report your unemployment. Did they give to the unemployment insurance, or are they going to say that no? Or you going to they're just going to deny people unemployment? Because there was also accusations, I guess, before the CEO had said, I'm not going to even call his name, in a forum online, he had said that 250 of his employees were thieves. So, do you consider, you have to ask who is considered a thief? Who is it? Me? And his justification of calling it because there are some people who work 2 hours a day. Okay, that's fine. How you can prove that would be a very interesting conversation to have, especially 250. But there is software to monitor that. But is it that you go by the pecs of the keyboard? Or, I mean, there's all kinds of issues with that. So there has to be some kind of resolutions. And you should be able to at least give HR a chance to clarify those issues and hold their feet to the fire because, yes, it's their fault too. So that's it in short. You guys can cover, Paula. You can probably think of some other things to cover, but I think this is a lesson for job seekers. And also, I've got to add, this is your chance to understand how important it is to research companies that you may want to work for.
Mhm.
Because somewhere, even though there might be debacles not on this level, but there are others on other levels that just don't quite make international news that you should be
Right.
aware about. So, Paula, go ahead and provide some other perspective, or if you want to add to this, go right ahead.
I wanted to elaborate on your first point about the emotionality behind all this. So
Mm.
I think it's really important to work through that before you go out there and start to look for another job. And I
Good
know
point.
everybody doesn't have the liberty to do that. Like
Hmm.
they might need money and they have to go work. But whatever you can do, if you need to see a counselor, if you need to talk with friends to get through some of that, because a lot of people carry that baggage to their interviews. And in this instance, it might be okay for some of those people because it's such a well-known thing. When they go into the interview, it's going to be talked about. But we're talking about the general job seeker out there. If you've been laid off and you've been terminated and you've got some really bad feelings towards that, and it's really difficult to not bring that forward in the interview.
Hmm.
Just little things that you'll say in the pessimistic way that you might answer a question, and you were wronged, and you feel bad about that, and that's totally justified. But be really careful about your wording then with your interview responses, because sometimes it's really difficult to walk that fine line in an interview where you're not going to say anything bad about the employer. Sometimes you can get away with giving pieces of it, but it's normally going to paint you in a negative light. So I just, really would encourage people to try to work through that before they get out there and interview, because it's usually something that they bring forward.
Yeah, yeah. And the fact that it's on their resume, so it's going to be, I mean, depending on how much time they spent with the company or whether they decide
Right.
to put it on, if you put it on, be prepared to respond to questions about that and your experience and how you feel about it. Because if they sense that you have resentment, no matter how widely publicized this has been, they're going to look for you to have some resolution
Mhm.
when you go to the table, Damien?
For me, job loss was uh, very emotional. The first book I wrote, I talk about the emotional wave, which is something that I worked on with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, when she was alive, was the world's expert on death and dying,
Mhm.
and understanding the emotional wave is the critical thing. You'll hear people refer to it as an emotional roller coaster, whatever graphic works for you. But the most important thing is you cannot go into an interview angry or depressed,
Yeah.
because that's gonna you can't hide that. I mean, you may sound good, but your body language is going to betray you. Um,
Mhm.
and my recommendation is, even if you're feeling these things, for an hour or two, leave it behind, shine as best as you can, and carry on. And, people say, oh, just shake it off, work it through, you're going to be fine. In my experience, you continue to experience these experiences through your entire job search process, and you truly resolve them when you're back at work. And the reason for that is, every time you get a bill, uh, and you have to decide, well, which three bills am I not going to pay this
Right.
month? You go around and around and around, and this whole thing is a separate show. But the most important thing to remember is, for the people out there, especially the 900, is you are experiencing righteous anger. You have been wronged, and there's nothing wrong about saying that.
Hmm.
It's just, I would caution you, when you're interviewing, to try not to reflect that, because even though you're angry, the issue is, another company doesn't want to hire a former company's problem,
Mhm.
and you need to come across as enthusiastic, professional, uh, ability to do the job, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So all I wanted to say was it's a very complex process, and it doesn't go away overnight. But again, if you need help, don't be ashamed to get counseling, because there are agencies out there in our area, family services, and it's income based. So if you go in and say, I really need help and I have zero income,
That's great.
yeah, then you pay zero.
Hmm.
So kind of that's my,
What a great resource. Right.
Right. Yeah. And something else I got to add to while I'm thinking about it. And I've learned this from an attorney friend. I'll even mention his name, Tom Spigel. If you're out there, shout out to you, because him and I have had some discussions about that before when the pandemic started. In fact, we did a couple of podcasts. I was on his and he was on mine. um, One of the things to consider is if you feel like, and you know, I don't know if there was a better employee, maybe there might have been one or two that might have said, hold off, that's okay. I'm not going to take your money because I'm going to sue instead. And you probably didn't think, you may not have thought about that at the time, but being that HR's got to do all those calls, you're thinking, okay, how can I make the most of this? And there was some damage that was being done that was claiming. One, there was a, as far as we know at this particular time, there was an employment statute that was broken and violated, that there might be some other compensation that might be to be had at that particular point. So if you plan to sue, you don't take the money. But having said that, I think that might be the extra money, and we can get into all that to say. But be judicious and don't make decisions in the heat of those moments. And I think a week or two is kind of still in the heat of those moments, if you know what I mean, because you're still feeling the emotional impact of having to deal with that. These people were let go without a net. It's not that they get to work out the rest of their time. It's like they're no longer in, the keys were taken, the doors are locked, so to speak. So, you know, I know that might be kind of tough. I don't know if you guys had anything to add on that into that, but I think if you're considering the whole circle of what you can also do legally, be thoughtful and consult a lawyer. So there are some tricks to that. You can. What I was going to say, you can go to tomspigel.com and yeah,
Shameless plug.
never mind, tomspigel.com, and he has a bunch of articles on labor and unemployment, and some of you may even seen him as he's been on like CNN and some of the big networks talking about that, and I'm sure he's going to be on sometime soon. I've got to send him a message and see if he is so I can see myself. But but I think there's a lot. This is the time when America can be, you know, learn to be prepared all the way through instead of just what's happening at the moment. What you know, what button they're going to press apply to. The
Mhm.
scope is a whole lot larger than that now. So if
And
you guys don't have anything
yeah, I
else,
do. Well,
okay, Paula, go ahead.
Um, speaking of outplacement, I'm really kind of surprised at how many people don't take advantage of their full outplacement package as far as services
Right.
that are provided. So I see you guys are both kind of shaking your heads. So I think I'm surprised at the number of people who come to me and like, yeah, I was offered a resume writing or a critique from somebody. I didn't take advantage of that. And I think they're feeling kind of like just they don't want to be even tied to that company and they're tired of it and they just want to move on. And therefore, sometimes they don't take advantage of services that I believe they should have. At
Hmm.
least start with those services and exhaust them and go through that process and then start, working through some other things if that's not enough.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Damien.
The I'll be very quick. Um, Having been on the other side of the desk, both sides of the desk, the
Hmm.
driving factor, where you have the greatest amount of control is if it's in person. When they're all said and done, they'll usually slide across the desk a brown manila envelope. And sometimes they'll say, why don't you take it out and sign it right here? Because if you sign the document, you have signed away any legal right that you have. And what I've learned is the longer you hold on to the document, the greater your leverage becomes.
Mm,
So my
Interesting.
my
Yeah.
recommendation is do not sign the document. Give yourself space, and probably most important, excuse me, have somebody who's qualified look
Yeah.
at it. And a
mhm.
labor attorney, it's worth the money because they're going
Yeah.
to tell you either thumbs up, thumbs down, and it's not going to change anything, but at least you're going to know whether or not it's worth pursuing legal action, which, oh, by the way, you're going to be paying for until things get settled, or not. And if they gave you the best deal you're going to get, then know that you've done your due diligence, sign it, and then go on to outplacement and start the process.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was involved in the counseling part of a lot of federal workers having being displaced back in 2010, 2011 nationwide, and going to some of those army bases, especially army, well, not army, they were army bases, but military is a whole nother ball of wax we can get into. But having said that, large companies though in them have something in common, and that is if they've been threatened a number of times, they're hoping that somebody will save them. And many times in the outplacement world, they're thinking that, oh, that I'll be saved. And so I really don't need those services. And that's a huge mistake because that's not always true. In fact, that doesn't happen as you hear some of the sexy testimonies from other people that, yeah, but I got this job the next day, or somebody reached out to me. That doesn't, most time that is just the beginning of a long-term labor and finding the next job for a lot of folks. But I think
Right.
for the most part, people should be somewhat mentally prepared. Take the counts, find out what uh, psychiatric or psychological counseling is available. Take it. Get whatever doctors work. If you're getting like an 8-week service like these people, you still have that. You should still have that insurance if they're taking it out through that time. They may not, but that's a question you've got to ask. But I know we spent quite a bit of time, but I think it's really important. It was a chance to give people a lesson on how to respond to those instances if you're being laid, because anybody could be laid off
Right.
at any given time. If we learned from the last Great Recession,
Right.
nobody's safe from that. So let's move on. We're talking about how to stand out and get noticed by employers. Um, Unfortunately, that's one way to stand out in the way that you don't want to be. But I'd like to know is you two as practitioners, I no longer am the paid practitioner of the group, but what are you saying to convince your clients that resumes are not the only documents that they need for a job search? I've run across comments recently that where people are are the first thing they say, and they'll say time after time, as far as what are you doing with your job search? Well, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I'm getting my resume. I'm working on my resume," and they tweak their resumes for weeks and weeks. And excuse my lack of verb tense that I missed out here on the question, but you guys know what I mean. What are you saying to convince people that the resume is not the end all to be all for their job search? I'll start with you, Paula.
Well, I like to tell them like resume is a part of who you are. That's your business writing. It's a marketing document, yes, but that's a very succinct snapshot of who you are. And then building upon that is your cover letter and your LinkedIn profile and your executive bio if you are in that realm. So I just think altogether it paints like a broader picture of who you are. And they all
Mm,
have little parts of your personality and the work that you've done and the accomplishments that you've had. So resume is part of it. And absolutely get that updated, but think about those other parts as well because you want to be able to hit the ground running with a comprehensive idea of who you are and very targeted. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. It's not just about
Mhm.
getting your resume together and the duties that you did, but what is your target? Because if you jump forward to step two of getting your stuff together without really examining the kind of roles that you're going to be going for, then your documents are not going to be very good. So I think it's all about that broader picture of who you are as a professional, and your resume is just one portion of that. So that's what I try to convince people on.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Damien?
Agreed with everything. Excuse me. Where I start is with their career summary, because you really can't plan a resume or anything else until they know what they want to do, or at least have a general idea of where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
And career summary is a combination of the best of your past and where you want to go. So it's a future forward statement. I mean, you say it, it becomes your 30-second commercial, and that provides you the focus you need throughout your job search. And then everything kind of goes from there. Career summary, resume, LinkedIn profile, et cetera, cover letter, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing that I talk about, and I'm just saying it in a different way, is that you need to be consistent across all of your social media and
Good point.
everything else that's
Mhm.
out there for you. Because if you say one thing on your resume and another thing on your LinkedIn profile, or if the things don't add up, human resource managers are just going to go on to the next person. And then finally, what I also say is the reason why it's so important for you to have a complete, full, and robust LinkedIn profile is because you're opening up you to the world. And it actually has a much, much broader scope in terms of eyes, people seeing it, than your resume ever will. And it can generate leads, connections, jobs
Yeah.
that your resume, although it's great, can never do on its own legs. And
Right.
that LinkedIn is a critical part of your job search. And then everything else all has to basically say the same thing, because they will look. They will look. They
Mm-hmm.
will look at your Facebook profile and your
Mhm.
LinkedIn profile and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. And it's got to be telling the same story.
Yeah.
I like how
I'm
you brought
surprised.
up elevator pitch.
Go ahead, Paula.
I
Go
like how
ahead,
you brought
Paula.
up elevator pitch, Damien. You know, that's such, when you think about it, really crafting that message for your elevator pitch and your LinkedIn profile, those two elements when you're networking are so much more important than your resume, because you might not be giving someone your resume in that conversation. Usually that first conversation with someone is kind of like a touch. You're just letting them know you're interested in maybe something different. It might not be until the third conversation with someone that you even supply your resume.
Mhm.
So, like you mentioned, your elevator pitch and your LinkedIn are going to happen first.
Mhm. And then one other
Yeah.
thing, real quick, I'd like to add is, as we start to go back to in-person meetings, I am a strong advocate of a two-sided business card. On the first page, on the first side, rather, is your contact information, the title that you're looking for, and maybe one or two or three bullet points if you can fit it. And then on the back is your career summary. And the reason why you do that is every time you hand it out, I always used to hand out two and say, here's one for you and here's one to pass along. It has everything the person needs to know about you. And all they do is they take it and they put it in their pocket. You hand them resumes and they're folding them or putting them in their
Yeah.
and it's just we I could go on and on about how many times a business card has traveled from person to person to person that then produced a job. But
Mhm.
again, that's something that as we're starting to come online and stay online, that I think folks should think about.
Yeah. I was just trying to think, when was the last time I've seen a business card?
Right.
Y- you know, but I think too, people can also use the electronic if people want to have a business card. I think that these days with the QR code that LinkedIn provides,
Yeah.
I think that is really replacing the business card at this particular point. Um, there is some indication to me that the business card might be a thing of the past. But having said that, though, it's still good to have to stand out, because it's just a way to that if nobody else is doing it and
Right.
you're doing it, you get a chance to stand out
Mhm.
and perhaps get noticed. But yeah, I think all those things are very important. I'm just still surprised that people are still so reserved in not marketing themselves in such a way to think that that it comes across that you think you have a right to be hired instead of competing to be hired, and it comes across by the lack of preparation, because
Mhm.
somebody's going out their way to build profiles on all the social networks to have a
Mhm.
decent resume. It may not be the
Mhm.
prettiest, aesthetically pleasing resume, but their points and their are succinct. They have accomplishment and results, and they're tangible, and they can articulate very well. What value that they're bringing to a company to solve their problem. Uh, all that gets taken for granted in this world still. And I think it's the brainwashing that my generation may have done in saying all you need to do is work hard and have these basic things and cut and paste and that whole thing. So yeah, I think people get lulled to sleep very easily. So you know, people need to take heed of that. Let's talk about something else that's come across a lot, and there's a lot of news about this, about the stay interview. And this is opposite of the hiring interview, is that the department or the boss is going to somehow proactively, um, and I say somehow because to me some of it's kind of ridiculous in the
Right.
sense that really, so are you going to stay? Really, we'd love to have you. Knowing they'll lie through teeth, knowing that there's nothing going to be promised. But I understand that they're trying to think of ways to retaining an employee. Now that you got an idea, I think it's a bad idea to call it
Yes.
that. Paula, what do you think of the state interview? Good idea or bad idea?
I think it's a good idea. So this will be a
Okay.
fun debate. I
Okay.
think, well, and I think it might go back to what we're talking about as a stay interview. To me, I think of a stay interview as doing research to find out why your top talent or everybody, I guess it's not necessarily just top talent, but why they're
Ah,
staying.
the
You know,
plot
why they're
thickens.
staying.
You
Right.
made
So
a you
it's,
made a Freudian slip, Paula.
what did I
That's
say?
all red. You already had a Freudian slip
Yeah, what do you think?
already. It's saying that the top talent is okay.
Yeah.
We'll come
So
back to that. You
Yeah.
continue.
yeah. So, I mean, I think why not get more information about gain insights into why are they staying, and then you're building trust. It's a two-way conversation. I think of it as an extension to a survey. So when they do employee surveys about engagement and all kinds of other things, that's a one-way interaction, whereas a stay interview is a little bit more of it's a lot more of a two-way interaction, where they can actually have a business conversation about it then, and maybe identify some patterns of why people are staying and what's really great, what we can amp up, what we can maybe hire for, a certain uh, quality that we find, that maybe co-op programs, maybe those employees who were co-ops of ours who are still here 20 years later, maybe we should put more efforts into our co-ops. So I think it could be a really great idea. I do think that human resource professionals are extremely strapped right now, and a lot of the recruiters and others that I'm talking with, they say, yeah, great idea, but who's having time to do this?
Mhm.
Damien.
Well, uh, having been, having had, being the victim of stay interviews, it's got to be done by the right person in the organization. And
Mhm.
it can't be your boss
Yeah.
or your boss's boss,
Good
because
point. Great
you're not
point.
going to, yeah, you're not going to tell them the truth. You're going to tell them what they want to hear. Because if you tell them how you really feel, then you're putting your job in jeopardy.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience. Now, if you have a neutral party, maybe you'll say a little bit, but I still don't think you're going to be, unless it is a top performer and you are trying to find out the commonality between those that perform the best in your company. The vast majority of people will panic, I think, if the boss says, "Hey, why don't you come into my office and we can just talk?" And in theory, I think a stay interview is a great idea, but I think the reality of it is that for the most part, you're going to get back what you want to hear and not what is really going on. I mean, that's just my opinion, and I'll give you an example. I won't name the company, but they sent out a sample, and they said that this is absolutely anonymous. There's no way that we can find out the results. Uh, when in fact, when it was coded, it came back to the supervisor who the person was and what they said. And then the supervisor, in this case, used the survey to beat on the person on their one-on-one stay
Yeah.
interview. And people don't people don't trust their boss with the truth. I don't think, because it's going to put their job in jeopardy if the truth isn't what the company culture is all about. So if you're having a bad time with the company, or if it's been reorganized and you're in a new position that you don't like, and you're terrified about having to look for a new job, you're going to be low key, you're going to smile, you're going to do your job, you're going to keep your mouth shut, and you're going to come in, you're going to do your job, and you're going to leave. And the biggest loser is the company. But that's my feeling. I think it's a great idea, but I don't think you're going to get the answers you're looking for.
Yeah. I have several problems with the stay interview. And one of them is what Paula had said. You want to see what your top talent says. Well, your top talent in a very good company. Not everybody works for Google and Microsoft, and everybody not doesn't want to stay. But at least you could count on a market rate compensation aspect of it that's going to be there, where a lot mid-sized and smaller businesses don't have. So you say, hey, top talent, how you doing today? We want to know your thoughts. And then you're going to start to grade that in the curve. Then what message do you send when they leave? Because top talent they're not staying, for the next paycheck, because automatically what are you going to give them 10, 15, 20%? Because the next company is automatically, just for them to go walk across. I gave this analogy across, on Wednesday. Somebody, the average Joe, can get a 10% raise by walking across the street to the competitor and say, I want to work for you. I used to work for them, your competitor. Okay, they'll gladly and give you 10%. That's obligatory stuff. That's without negotiating. So
Mm-hmm.
right there, you just got 3 years. If you're a top talent, then 20, 30% or more is very viable.
Mm-hmm.
So, the message you're going to say, you say, we want you to stay and we rely on these top talent people. And I'm not saying they're the only ones you interview. Of course not. I don't think, although I wouldn't doubt that some companies going to rely on the top 10 data, the top 10 people's data to rely on to make changes or to try to make the environment better. In fact, top 10, are they going to really say something that about the culture that needs to change? Because they're the ones thriving. They are the culture, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah.
So that part of it, and I think the other part of it too is that calling it a stay interview or anything like that is just really more or less of a quasi performance review of some type.
You're right.
And it's kind of hard not to dig into the one without digging to the other, unless you really do truly do it anonymously without coding, folks. Then that might be something, but then you're just asking them. And then two, what about the people that you don't want to stay? What is that going to be called? You know
Right.
what I mean? For whatever reason, they may do great work, but their core values don't align with the
Mhm.
companies, and neither do their plans align with the companies either. So therefore, yeah, this is all kinds of issues I personally have with it. And it's not just personal. I'm looking out for, people being, duped in some sense because, like we said before, layoffs can happen at any time. You're in the middle of giving a state interview, then 3 months later, that, oh, we're laying off a bunch of you. I mean, and even if it's done right, there isn't a there isn't an expectation you can communicate that's going to make sense to anyone. Paula, I know you're dying to say something.
Well, I think how I've seen it work the best is when it's not a part of any kind of performance review. When it truly is just gathering some data about why people are staying. So some questions like, what keeps you working here? That's very broad. It's, I think, pretty much non-threatening. Back to Damien's point, if it comes by from the right messenger, I think you could get some great data. Another question could be something about like, how do you like to be recognized? So
But
they're getting feedback about how they could do things better to
then I
keep
got a
people.
question for you. If that's all it is, what's the difference between a state interview and a 360 interview?
Ooh. Ooh.
um, I don't know. I think a 360 interview is more about how does everybody else see you as a performer,
But you're
along with
giving
how you see
feedback to each
yourself.
other. But essentially, you're giving feedback to management. Management's giving feedback to you, and you giving feedback to management.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily performance based though, the stay interview.
But you're asking performance type of questions, whether you intend to or not.
You think so? So if you say something like, what keeps you
Convince
working
me
here?
otherwise. What
Yeah, so
question would be? What question would be? Can't be interpreted as uh, a data interview, or better yet, as a state interview in a 360 situation.
well, okay, so here's what I'm thinking about this. So let's say I have a client who's a software engineer and he works at a company and a lot of people are leaving because of what you said, Damien. Excuse me, Mark, what you said, like with people leaving to get a 15% increase somewhere else. So they can go across the street to a different company and get 15%. So they want to find out, where they've had a lot of software engineers leave recently. So they want to find out, why are the ones who are staying, so that we can maybe bump that up when we're hiring people. So they might talk about, they say, what keeps you working here? And they say, well, we've got great benefits. I really love my team. My manager is really great. I really like the fact that you have 8 weeks paternity leave. And someday my wife and I might be having a child. So like they learn about some of those things. Like it can be a two-way conversation that I think that maybe then they can use those insights for other things, maybe for bumping up those programs or advertising those programs, or that's helping retain. So maybe someone wants to leave and they have a conversation with their manager and they say, hey, I know you want to go to XYZ company. What are you gonna giving up when you leave here? And maybe that's just opening up some discussion around that. I don't know. That's the way I thought of it for a stay interview.
The other, well, I guess the other hat to drop is, if it's a state interview, what are you giving them to stay? I
Yeah.
mean, essentially, that's why I kind of feel like there's some, and you are valid in everything you just said. I'm not saying that does not happen, but
Mhm.
if it's a state interview, are you getting people to stay, or are you trying to find out that what will help everybody else stay? Or I mean,
I
where
think it goes
does
back to that. Yeah, I think we're thinking about it two different ways. I think you're thinking about
and
it
that
as like,
is
yeah, you're trying to
probably
get them to say when they say they're leaving. And I'm trying to think about it as more of like an HR tool in their tool belt to retain employees long term.
okay. All right. All right. I think that's a fair explanation. Damien, you got something on mind?
Well, I'm just sitting here and thinking, if you're losing uh, engineers to the competition, are they the cream of your crop? Excuse me. And if they are the cream of your crop, are they leaving because the company is paying more? Uh, and then that would impact the salary structure of the organization, or at least in that strata.
Mhm.
Or are people leaving a particular department because the manager is a jerk?
Right.
Um, I mean, I think that you can find that information out, but there has to be an atmosphere of trust. If I don't trust you,
Mhm.
if I think I'm going to tell you something and it's going to get back to my boss, I'm going to filter it somehow,
Mhm.
because you don't want to hear it. I'll tell you about one of my stay interviews very quickly. My boss took me out after 90 days, sat me down, told me everything that I was doing wrong, and say, I really wish we would have hired the other guy from Cleveland. He said that to me. That's
Mhm.
my stay interview, right?
How
90 days, etc. What he didn't know is that the other guy from Cleveland was and is one of my very, very good friends.
oh boy.
And in fact, Alan, recommended to the recruiter in New York that they call me. And
Mhm.
there was a company survey that went around, and his ratings were so bad that they immediately moved him out to a non supervisory position. That's how seriously they took the survey.
Good.
But if you would have tried to pull that information out of the team and you were in human resources, you wouldn't have gotten that degree of honesty.
Interesting.
That's an
So,
excellent point. That's an excellent point.
Mhm.
Is that the bad companies will only find out how bad they are, but the tea leaves are already read. They don't trust them already, and
that's
the
right.
reason, and very often the prompt for these things, quite honestly, in the past, is because they smell that they want to either self validate that they're doing something right, or they're really just validating what they've been doing wrong all along. And when you do that, it just starts to you start to go from being hurt to being disabled. And I think that that's why to call it that. I understand this just got to be another better name than a stay
Right. Or
interview.
a couple of different names.
I think this is too many anomalies that can go along the way. But
Mhm.
having said that, it's become this trend now to where, should you be in a bad company that has a stay interview wants you to stay now, and somehow it doesn't make sense, then that's really accelerates your opportunities that to say it's time to go now
Yeah,
for
right.
real.
Gee, I never thought about leaving. Thanks for so much.
It's like it's sort of like the girl or guy that you've been with for a while. You can't stand now. Now they want to kiss you. What? It's not. It is really something. Patricia, thank you very much for being in the chat and being involved. She said, Damien, how did you know that horrible experience was a stay interview? It kind of goes along with what we're talking about. Is that really a stay interview?
Uh,
Right. That's what I was.
no, it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it just demonstrated poor Gary's lack of sensitivity, and how tone deaf he was. And, he he ended up being humiliated, and I ended up being the only person in the building that would talk to him, uh,
Hmm.
because it is what it is. And um, Patricia, Patty. Something else is after he said that to me, I no longer trusted him.
Mm,
There were things that I would uh, provide to him, information about things that were going on out in the branch stores, which I was running, that I
mhm.
would share to him. Just because then he would get that information and it's what he would do with it within the organization that I had no idea. I couldn't figure out why people would call me with things that I only said to him. And it wasn't just me, it was just his old management style. And to answer your question, though, Patty, I did not know it was a stay interview. It was positioned as a why don't we go out to lunch? And then boom, the bomb dropped. And it sounded like a stay interview. What it really communicated to me was, I'm really sorry you took the job. I mean, if you can find another job, go right ahead because we'd rather have somebody else, which ended up not being the truth. All it took was a change to another director, and everything thrived because it was being done the right way. And if I could
Yeah,
turn the corner for just one more thing, I
sure.
was talking about trust, trust and feedback. I'm thinking about the 900 people in the Zoom meeting. If everybody trusted him, why would somebody secretly record the Zoom meeting because it was only 3 minutes and then release it to the media? It comes down to trust because if they had not recorded it, you would have never believed it that somebody would pull 900 people together under the auspices of a town hall and then let you go in such a terse and insensitive way. No, you couldn't believe that unless you could see it and hear it yourself. And
Well, and that's a great point. Is that usually with that toxicity oozing out, there's been the patterns that have been ongoing for a long time to show, oh, something bad is really going to happen. And that person said, oh, I don't think this is going to go real well. And they turned on the record button, which, a minor argument might be that that person violated company policy about confidentiality, but who cares when you're being laid off at that particular point? So, oh, well, you might as well go for broke. Why not record it and release it to the rest of the world so they can see? And it would have oozed out anyway because got 900 other possibilities that other people are going to tell their story, and probably we're going to see postings of what this guy actually have said throughout. So it's going to get worse
absolutely.
from this point, and I'm going to be watching for every second of it because I love this kind of drama. I haven't watched soap operas since General Hospital since the mid '80s, so I need my fill. I need me something to fill this up. But we've come to the top of the hour. This was one of the best episodes ever of all time. So, Paula, because of you, we thank you very much for joining
Thank
Thank
us
you,
you.
Paula.
here.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Take a second to brag about something that you got coming up. Anything.
Coming up, well, nothing in the pipeline right now. Well, that's not true. I am speaking in January. I'll have it on my LinkedIn profile, but I'm speaking at
Awesome.
a Pong group. That's a
Okay.
professional. It stands for a networking group. I forget what the O
Okay.
is,
Okay.
but it's in Milwaukee. But I'm doing a remote. It's a remote meeting. Anybody can join. So if people want to find out more about acing your interview, I'm going to be speaking to that group. They said they normally have about 50 people in the meeting, but they can accommodate more. So I'll put that up on my LinkedIn profile. You can find me at Paula Christensen 1 on LinkedIn, and my website is Strategic Career Coaches. That's plural.com.
Great.
Awesome. Awesome. Damien, what you got
Uh,
coming up?
well, the Fox segment that I had mentioned had gotten delayed, but it
Mm,
actually ran last night, which is
awesome.
really kind of cool. And
Yeah.
I
Post it.
have.
Post it when you get a
Oh yeah,
chance.
oh yeah, exactly. It's just I didn't get a chance because last night was the Professionals in Transition Christmas party. Uh,
Oh,
right?
nice.
You hate Christmas parties when you're working, but when you're unemployed, you have no place to go.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And then the other thing that's exciting is I booked a presentation to a Society of Engineers for August of 2022. I mean, that's crazy, but I'm looking forward to that too.
What's it
Very nice.
on?
Very nice.
Interviewing and thriving in your position.
Yeah, good deal. I've got a couple of media placements coming up, but the one that seemed to hit the right stride was about better.com on Grit Daily. I posted, you can look at my timeline. The article's excellent. And shout out to Jeremy Knopf, who did an excellent job summarizing it all. Hopefully, I believe he's doing some other follow up. So you might see some other stuff from me regarding that because like I said, the drama is just great at this particular time. But we have one more show next week, and then we're done for about 3 weeks. After next week, it will be the January 14th will be the next show, and we have guests lined up already, and I'll announce that next week. I believe I'll try to announce it next week. Nicolette Barrett will be our guest next week for a special uh, Christmas kind of thing that we're doing. We'll leave it at that because we're still molding and playing with those ideas. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining the Modern Job Search Checklist. We stream to YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you ever want to catch up with us, you can check out our Facebook page, the Modern Job Search Checklist. And that is there right now as we end. And I want to thank you very much for coming. Come back next week and join us. Join me Wednesday on Job Seeker Nation. That will be the last show before the end of the year as well. And you guys have a great holiday. Thank you very much. If I don't see you next week, but otherwise, join us and we thank you. Peace in the Valley of Love. You guys have a great weekend.
Mark, thank you.
Thank